Good morning. Welcome to today's webinar. Today's topic will be on using and learning a little bit about Civil AccuDraw in the new FDOT SS4 or GeoPack SS4 or OpenRoads SS4. It's all within all of the new tools of OpenRoads, GeoPack, InRoads, MX. It's within each of them. And we'll spend some time this morning basically learning the differences between, some of the differences between MicroStation AccuDraw and Civil AccuDraw, how to activate the toolbar, learning where the settings are, being able to create and save favorites, learning how to use the shortcuts, and then I'd like to go into show a couple of examples in a design file. I'll probably stay in a design file most of the time. I wanted to first, actually I'll just show you where the general tool set is normally where you find it. There's a couple other places you can find it, which I'll go into. And then I want to go into the help a little bit and talk about if you need to find out some information. There's not a lot of information, but there's some general information that can help you get started there. And then we'll get into some examples. So let me just switch over into MicroStation. And so first of all, I wanted to talk about the differences between MicroStation AccuDraw and, well, the differences and similarities between MicroStation AccuDraw and Civil AccuDraw. So most of you are familiar with MicroStation AccuDraw, and this is a floating dialog. It can be enabled and disabled by clicking on this AccuDraw button here. There's also a Tools AccuDraw option down there that you can pick. And then it also has a settings for AccuDraw, which is normally picked off of the AccuDraw settings. And this is where you can change different things about the display, whether or not you're viewing, the view or context with the compass, that type of thing, the precision, so it picks up those settings. It also picks up settings from your design file. So when you're maybe placing an angle, it'll basically use this format. The angle readout here is where it's degrees, minutes, seconds versus decimal degrees, minutes, seconds. Also is where it reads out whether it's showing bearing or distance. A lot of the normal settings there. But for example, if you were to draw a line with MicroStation AccuDraw and start a point, now you can use the AccuDraw to either do it like a delta distance here of like 100 feet and lock it, and then maybe do a Y distance of 100 feet and lock it, and it would draw that line. And that's kind of how you use AccuDraw. It could be used for view settings also. You can, if you draw it and start a line and want to lock it in the X, you can key in an X key, which is a shortcut, and that locks that distance. And then if you want to lock the Y, you can lock the Y like that, and then you draw on the line that way. And you can do that within side views, top views, that type of thing. So some of you you may be familiar with it. You may not be. In this case, I'm in a rotated view. Notice that my compass, or my actual cursor there, is oriented by view. So if I were to draw a line, I could snap to these different views this way. And if I want to do a polar, I can switch it from polar, and now I can set an angular lock here and a distance that way. And this is the normal sort of components. Now if I were to components of AccuDraw, if I were to set this to context, then my coordinate value is based on my true north of my file. So if I were to go back and change this to an unrotated view and start drawing a line, you would see that my compass is set to my true north. And as soon as I set that, well, the context is going to be essentially set to whatever orientation that you want. So you can do top view and draw it. Now it's true north. You doing true east, so on and so forth. So that's how you kind of move around or manipulate the AccuDraw settings with just normal MicroStation. Let me just delete these. And now I want to introduce the Civil AccuDraw. And Civil AccuDraw, before we get into it, if you want to look at, if you want to learn about it, you can go to the Open Roads Help icon here. And Civil AccuDraw is in the general settings. So it's in the Civil Geometry, General Geometry. And then if you open this up, you'll see that this little compass icon is what's in this General Geometry Civil Toggles. And of course the one right here is the Activate Civil AccuDraw toolbar. And then it talks about the different buttons and what they are, but it also will come over here and give you some more help information on the Civil AccuDraw link here. And there's a Getting Started. So this is essentially the benefits of Civil AccuDraw if you want to read about that. And what I thought would be interesting is this differences from MicroStation AccuDraw. And so if you look here, you can see, for those of you familiar with MicroStation AccuDraw, you can see what is similar and what's different with Civil AccuDraw just by reading some of the help files. So how do you activate Civil AccuDraw? Well, you notice that I use this button here to toggle on and off MicroStation AccuDraw. Well, I can use this button, Activate Civil AccuDraw here, or I can do it from the General Geometry. It's down here, Activate Civil AccuDraw. And of course, there's another way through the menus. There is a Civil AccuDraw Activate Toolbar this way as well. I'm just going to work off of the Task menu, and as soon as I activate it, notice that the MicroStation AccuDraw went away. You can still turn it back on, but one of the things that Bentley has recommended is that, you know, if you're going to use Civil AccuDraw, then disable MicroStation AccuDraw because they use some of the same similar shortcuts. As a matter of fact, in our workspace, we've created a little utility that we've mapped to the function 8 key that will toggle on one versus the other. So notice that if I'm using the F8 key, and if I hit F8, notice how Civil AccuDraw activates and MicroStation AccuDraw deactivates. And if I toggle it again, now MicroStation AccuDraw is activated and Civil AccuDraw is deactivated. So there's a toggle out there with the F8 key that will allow you to do that. Okay, so I'm going to activate Civil AccuDraw, and then we'll talk about this menu here. It's resizable. It's like any other little tool palette. It can be docked. I keep it pulled out. It has the actual settings menu right here. This is similar to the settings for AccuDraw. There isn't a pull down for, actually it's under Tools. You can get a Civil AccuDraw settings dialog pull out that way, but you can also get it right from the taskbar. If you just pull down here, it'll bring up the Civil AccuDraw settings, and it has similar. It has similar settings that you have with the MicroStation AccuDraw. If I just open MicroStation AccuDraw settings, you see it has operation display coordinates favorites, operation display coordinates for MicroStation, and they're very similar. So by reading up on one, you'll know what the other one does as well. The display is really just how the compass displays. In this case, there's a dynamic constraints one as well. And then the coordinate readouts, as far as what you get to see, similar this way. The one tab that's different is this Favorites tab. And what this Favorites tab is what is currently on this list, or I should say on this task palette. And these are what are delivered via the application when it's initially installed. However, it allows you to add favorites if you like. Like in this case, I've got a distance direction setting, distance direction unlinked setting, distance, and I'm going to cover some of these, how you use each of them. But let's say you needed a new one that isn't in this list. you could choose to add one, and it automatically adds an entry there. And the one that I want to add would be offset, and I'm keying this in, offset. And then once I have that, then I can pick on these coordinate fields, and I can select the different fields that I want to use for my favorite, or this particular new favorite. And for most of them, if it's a combination that it's familiar with, it will also pick a little icon here. Notice that there's now an offset icon here. And it also knows that this common origin field has to be no if you've got two separate offsets. For example, on this one here where you do distance direction, you can have the same common origin at a certain distance in a certain direction, and then locate a point or line, the end of a point, using the distance direction off of one point. But as some of these others, like an offset, it would need to have two separate either lines or two separate origins. That's really what the definition here means. So that's how you can create a favorite. The thing about favorites is they get stored over in your user app data folder. So if that folder gets deleted, then you would lose your favorite. It's stored by user setting, and what you'll have to do is just make sure that you don't delete this in your app data folder. When I say app data folder, if you look on your in the Project Explorer, if you go under users and find your user ID that you log into your computer with, there's an app data folder here, and this is where most of these MicroStation or the Bentley settings are being saved now for temporary files. If you dig down in here, you'll see there's an AccuDraw favorites here, and if you get into preferences, there's also some of the other favorites that you have or things that you've done in there. So a lot of times we're having you delete out this file. Just know that if you save something in the Civil AccuDraw settings and then delete this folder, you're obviously going to delete your favorite. You'll have to recreate it. It's not that big a deal to recreate it if you need to. And we can look into maybe saving some other favorites and having those delivered with the workspace. But I'm pretty sure that we did look into it, and it's a user-based setting, a user preference, if you will. Okay, so let's go ahead and start using some of these. The first one, I'll just show you how you can use a distance direction. That's one of the first ones on here. And usually that's a combination with a line. First of all, I'll need to create a start point, and then if I want to, make this a 500-foot distance, as soon as I hit the Enter key, you'll see that this outer compass circle is locked to 500. And notice there's also a lock on the cursor as well. Now, as soon as I uncheck this, notice that I'm just drawing a random line here. And in this case, you really don't need to use this distance direction because a line has a distance lock and a direction lock there. But if you didn't want to use this dialog and you wanted to use Civil AccuDraw, you could have the heads up digitizing, or I'm sorry, heads up locking this way. So you would, again, set 500 for the distance and maybe 45 for direction. And then you could draw your line that way. And then this is actually linked to that same distance direction. So that's how distance direction works. Notice how the compass moved to that new endpoint there. Now let's take a look at one that maybe is distance direction unlinked. So in this case, if I were to place a line with this distance direction unlink, then I could actually start a point here. Well, let's say that I want to offset this from another line. So what you do is you set in, I'll just start that again. So I'm going to start a line, and the first point has to be 500 feet from this line. So the way you do that is with the focus in the distance field, you key in O for offset, or O to pick an optional reference. And then you select a reference point on another line. So let's say if I pick it here, and then notice that the distance is now being tracked off of that point. So then I could key in 500 feet here, and then angle that I want to go would be, say, 90 degrees to my original point. And if I lock it, you'll see that now this is going to find two locations, and the one that I want to probably lock on is this one. And so that's where you can use two separate references, or an unlinked distance direction unlinked. Now here's one with distance. So let's say I want to start the first reference off of here, so I select a reference point off of this point here, and I could set this value to 500. And then for my second distance, I'll select another offset point here, and then it automatically finds where they're common, but let's say I set that to 1,000. Oops, 500 for that one. You just have to make sure that the focus is in the right field in order to lock it in. And in order to lock it, I'm just hitting the Enter key, and you get the lock button. And so now you'll notice that there's a solution there and a solution there. So that's where my first point is going to be. And then it remembers where those two are located there. So if I wanted to change, let's say now I wanted to change my offset again to be focused on this point. See how the compass moved up there, and now I'm moving, and let's say I want to be 500 feet, tab to this field, 500 feet from that first point, and let's say 1,000, let's say 600 feet. Probably won't solve. See, in this case it won't solve because those two don't intersect. So let me do 900. And now this is where the second point would be. Based on a 900-foot offset here, there's two solutions, and a 500-foot offset here, I'm setting this second point. And now that's where that second point is. So that's how you can use these two different ones. Here's another example. Let's say, for example, I need to do an offset. And I'll use these two lines in here. Before I do that, I want to rotate this view real quick. Go from here to here, and then I'm going to do an offset, and I'm going to start a point that I know is 50 feet offset. So I hit with the first offset focus field, I hit the O key, and I can select this whole line, and then I can set this value to say 100 feet, and when I hit enter, it locks it on that offset. And then for the second offset, what I want to do is find the point, find where it's 50 feet from this other line. So I'll key in O with my focus in that second offset field, and I can select this line, and then I can lock this value with the focus at, let's say, -50. And now I've located that point, and that's the start point. And that's how you can find that one. And it remembers the two lines that you're trying to work off of. So if I went ahead and set that first one to 100 again, and then set the second one to let's say 100, -100, it would locate where this point is 100 away from that one and 100 away from that one, and then it locates it that way. The other thing it does is it remembers how you built it. So this is the fact that it allows you to persist, what's called persist rules on things that you build with civil geometry. And if you wanted to change something about it, you could change any one of these values here. Like, let's say instead of that being 100 feet off, it's only 50 feet off on that side. So now it's 50-50 over here and 100-100 over here, and it remembers that the way you built the rules with that line. Now this works also with just normal MicroStation elements. If I come out here and I want to create a line, let's say 25 and 25. I can draw a MicroStation line that way too. And let's say I want to set this second. I don't want to lock the second offset, the first offset, but I want to lock the second offset. I can do that. And now I'm just following along here. And when I finish. But the one thing I did want to point out is that, see, when I did a MicroStation line and used the Civil AccuDraw to place it, it doesn't have the persist rules associated with it because I didn't use a civil feature. That's the difference between trying to use a MicroStation line with Civil AccuDraw. You can still locate things, but you don't have the intelligence built into it if you don't use the civil features. Now, the other thing that I find this useful for, some of these tools up here can, they're either useful or not useful. If you don't want to see some of these tools, if you just right-click, just like any other little taskbar or tool palette, you can uncheck the things that you don't want to use, like XY. What do I need XY for if I have the MicroStation AccuDraw? But if you're going to stay continually in just Civil AccuDraw, then you might want to have the XY, because it's essentially doing the same thing that AccuDraw does. If you were to draw a line with, it's just going to try to figure out the XY location, and so you could key the value in there if you wanted to. And delta XY is the same thing if you wanted to go a certain distance away from there in the X. And this is where you might want to set it to, if I hit the space bar, I can go to the shortcuts and I can rotate the compass to the view. And notice now that the compass has changed, so that if I want to set the X value to 100 and then the Y value to minus 100, it would know to go at a 45 from that point in this view and draw that line that way. So what I was pointing out, though, is that you have the same sort of tools with AccuDraw, but if you're going to stay within Civil AccuDraw, you might want to have those same capabilities. So that's why the XY and the DXY is in there. And then you have the Station Offset, which is a way to locate something off of a line. So let's say I needed to start a line, and I need to switch this to the Station Offset. Whenever you're doing the station offset, you want to make sure that you key in the O shortcut when you're in the offset field. So if I'm toggled to station, if I hit O, notice that just the value O actually gets keyed in there. If I tab to the offset and hit O, it allows me to select a reference line. And now I'm tracking, and I want to unlock that. So you hit the N key to unlock it. So now I'm tracking off of this alignment here. And so I can key in a value of, say, let me find a value here that's, let's start a line at 550 and an offset of 20 feet. So this is where 550 and 20 feet is. And then I could, go to the next one. Let's call this 552. And as soon as I hit the tab key, it locks it and set the offset to 20 feet there. And now I've placed that line. And if I click on it, you'll see that it has that information. It's hard to see, so let me go to the preferences and change this color. Some of you have seen me do this before, but this basically makes it a little easier to see. Now my tooltips are yellow. But notice how it's set to the values that I had keyed in there. Now this can be useful, but there's another tool that does the same thing without Civil AccuDraw. And I don't want people to get confused with this station offset tool. It's the only way to build something that is at a station and offset, because you could do the same thing without Civil AccuDraw using the single offset partial tool. And I could just click any line and just tell it I wanted to go from here to here and don't mirror it. And if you click on this, it has the same information as this line, but I didn't use Civil AccuDraw. I used the station offset tool, or the single offset partial tool. And I can control this as well. I can set this to 550. And I can change the offset minus 20. And I can do the same thing over here. So, You have two tools for doing the same type of thing. The main thing that you need to know with using Civil AccuDraw is when you get this dialog up and you start building something, that you remember, like if I click a point here, notice, see, I'm still in the original command. So the context menu changes a little bit. If you to turn this off, see, I can still set the distance, and I can use the arrow key to change the direction. So if I wanted to set this to 50 feet and then toggle to a direction, I can do north 0, or I can kind of lock it this way. Just hit the enter key with that value, and now I've drawn that line in there without using Civil AccuDraw. As soon as I create this line and introduce Civil AccuDraw, you'll notice I get a whole nother settings, another offset dialog in the cursor settings. And you just have to pay attention to which field you're entering information in by using the tab and the enter keys. So like if I wanted to create this line at an offset from this, the way to do it is to make sure you get to the first offset field and set your reference by keying in O, clicking the line, and then make sure that you tab to that field in order to lock it in at minus 50 feet. And then you have locked it in, and it's going to go 50 feet from this line. And then as far as what you do with the other field, it's not necessary. I mean, as long as you're setting it at 50 feet there, you can make it as long as you want. So you just have to practice with it on, practice with it off. There's a lot of precision input you can use just from the actual tools within Civil Geometry. Now you don't have all those, always all those options when you're working with MicroStation. So in this case, you could, if you wanted to switch to Civil AccuDraw to do things a little more precise, you could use it, find its use that way. I did want to talk about how to use Civil AccuDraw in some other views because the actual tools change a little bit. So I have a profile view out here and a cross-section view and a 3D view here. And you'll notice that as soon as I click on the various view types, the AccuDraw settings dialog changes a little bit. See how it switched from, in the plan view, it gives me all of these different locates for distance, direction, distance, so on and so forth, as well as the station offset, offset, delta, station offset. But as soon as I click on the profile view, I get a different set. I get Z, delta Z, profile offset, profile by slope. A lot of you are used to using the the VPI generator tool or within the Legacy Geopack, and you can do the same thing with open roads. You just click in the profile view, and you can go to, with Civil AccuDraw, if you go to the profile complex by VPI, as soon as you start the command, it asks you to enter the first PI, and you can do it by station. In this case, it's set to profile offset, but if I wanted to change this to a Z value, I can now actually enter a station and an elevation. So I could key this in at, let's say 20, and as soon as I hit the tab key, it locks it, and then I could set the elevation to 50, and now the first PI is going to be placed there. And then if I want the next one, let me go to station 2500 and lock it. And then I can set the Z value to, let's say, 20 and lock it. And notice now that I'm placing that. And then this is where you can either, I didn't want to be doing complex. I knew I was doing the wrong tool. You have to forgive me. I'm just getting over a little bit of a flu here. So the tool I want to do is profile. That is the tool I want to be using. I'm looking for usually I have some type of curve parameters that it's keying in, because it's set to asymmetric. Parabola, vertical curve parameters. That's normally what you see in there. At any rate, that's what I was going to point out, is that you could start using, station 2500. You have to tab into this field. This is what I wanted to do, is make sure this was unchecked, or check this curve value to 0. And if you want to put in a curve parameter instead and have it automatically calculate the curve length for you, you could set your, let's say, 135 for your curve parameter, and then just start placing your PIs that way. Once you have it built, you can go in and actually change these if you need to override them by selecting on them. Even though you might have used the Civil AccuDraw to place them, you can still override the values, say 60. And if you want to change this curve parameter, if you pick on the curve, you can actually change the values, either the curve parameter or the actual length after it's been placed. So if you want this to really be 25 feet curve length, of course this feature is not correct. You can change the feature anytime. Just use a centerline feature. And now it's normal. So there's lots of ways of using Civil AccuDraw. Another way is if for example, you were going to start a line, let's say you need to be offset from the existing ground, and you can lock the station by clicking on these lines within your profile. And what these lines in your profile are horizontal points of intersection. So let me just switch to a different profile here. Let's just open the profile for this alignment, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So this line, if you look at it in plan, has a PI here, which corresponds to this line, and then it has a PC, a PT, and a PI. So that's what the PC is here and the PT is there. So if you wanted to create a profile that started at the PC, you could simply just lock on this line here. See how it snaps to that line? If you hit the Enter key, it will lock to there. And then if you want to be offset from the existing ground, just say for example, you can set the profile Civil AccuDraw offset. And if you tab to the offset field and hit the O key, it lets you pick a reference line to be offset from. And then you can lock it to say -3 feet below there. And now I've set a point right there at that location. So the first point is now on that PC, 3 foot offset from the existing ground. I did that all by using the profile view and Civil AccuDraw. Now I could do the same thing. I could just come in and find a station. Let's say there's a station in my plan view right here that I need to snap to. So if I snap on this point right here and hit the Enter key, it locks it in the plan view for me. And then as I zoom in here, I'm still on this offset. So if maybe I wanted to do a slope from this other point, I could set the value now to slope and tab down here and say this is supposed to be a -1% and lock it. And that would automatically draw that profile line at a 1% slope from the other one, and the actual PVI is right at the station at this horizontal location here. And if I click on it, I should see that it has locked in here this 1% value, and it's locked in at a station over here, and it has the actual elevation there. And if you wanted to override any of these, you could actually key in this value. Let's say it should be at 548. And now it's at 1% at that location. So that's how you can use it in the profile view and in the plan view. The main thing to realize there is that whenever you're using Civil AccuDraw, that you get extra tools that come up. So you got to make sure you're in the active view. If you select, I'm using the vertical geometry, go back to horizontal. That's the one thing I wanted to point out. And you can turn it on and off whenever you need to. The F8 key will toggle between Civil AccuDraw and MicroStation AccuDraw. Whenever you're in a tool set, you can go to the space bar and you can go into the various setup toggles or the quick key-ins here. Whereas when you're in MicroStation AccuDraw, the space bar will toggle you between the compass and the rectangular and the polar. It doesn't work that way with Civil AccuDraw. So for example, if I toggle into MicroStation AccuDraw and start drawing a line, if I use the space bar, it toggles between the polar and the rectangular coordinates, and the actual cursor actually changes too, or the actual compass changes. When you're using Civil AccuDraw, the difference here is if you use the space bar, it brings up the shortcut keys, and then you can then pick up the different shortcuts. In MicroStation, if I go back to F8, I want to use MicroStation AccuDraw. If you want to see the shortcuts that you can use, you use the question mark key. With the focus in here, you can hit the question mark, and in MicroStation AccuDraw's shortcuts will turn up. So subtle differences between the two, but just some things to be aware of. And that kind of just covers what I had to show today. Let me see if there was any questions that didn't get addressed. Not too many. It looks like they've all been addressed. We'll go ahead and have these questions and answers posted on posted webinars site for y'all to be able to read up on. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and conclude this one. I knew it was going to be a short one. If you need any other help on it, you feel free to call our office. We'll certainly be happy to assist with that, in case you have any comments or questions. You guys all know who I am, where to find me, and there's the email and our support number. Be happy to help you guys. So that'll be all for today. Thank you for attending. Stay tuned for the next webinar.